happens to little boys who disobey their mothers?
The boogeyman gets them.
We are talking Beware the Boogeyman, and this is a 2024 anthology movie, but with a kind of themed kind of creature within the film. So Beware the Boogeyman effectively has a wraparound story where we have a doctor being interviewed by another doctor for a kind of position in this psychiatric hospital. So we have this interviewee played by Elissa Dowling, and she's effectively interviewing for a job, and the interviewer discusses various kind of patients, and they say that they have this strange phenomena where there is 5 patients within this hospital who seem to have some type of shared trauma in regard to this kind of boogeyman figure, and they can't really figure out why 5 completely separate inmates are experiencing phenomena, or in their interpretation, mental disorders that involves this kind of particular kind of one figure. And then of course we go into the 5 stories which all centre around this kind of boogeyman character itself. So let's discuss. I have to say, I actually think the concept here of having both the kind of the wraparound story being effectively an interview in a psychiatric hospital talking about patients is actually quite a fun one, and it's a good through line, I think. So I actually have to say, I think the idea here of that kind of structure is a good solid idea, and although it doesn't really have a story in itself, it does have a little bit of a kind of a twist at the end, which I think was reasonable as well. So I actually kind of quite liked the concept here of having this as a kind of a through line for these stories, because it kind of makes sense in a narrative way. And what I also quite liked about it as well is we have our kind of both our doctors talking about the possible reasons why these different kind of cases, after we've seen each one of them, may well have existed in regards to kind of explaining it away in a kind of medical fashion. So I kind of like that. I also think the idea of having a consistent boogeyman in each of these kind of stories is interesting as well, because it makes it feel less of an anthology and more of a kind of different chapters in a kind of like an arc, so to speak. It's just different people's experiences effectively with one entity. Admittedly, there is a downside to that, and I'll come on to. But again, it gives it I think a strong kind of backbone in some ways. In regards to the stories themselves, I have to be honest with you, I didn't think it was the greatest anthology. My favourite story was the 4th one, and the reason I like this because it stood out because in this particular kind of story, we have our kind of protagonist is already aware of the boogeyman, and he's effectively trying to capture evidence of it to try and exonerate him from a death that resulted at the hands of the boogeyman that he's kind of got blamed for, and he kind of hires this kind of filmmaking student to try and help him out. This one also has some found footage elements in it. Admittedly, they do use that thing where you see like the record side on the actual footage, which doesn't happen when you use a video camera, but there you go. But again, it gave it a kind of a little bit more of a unique feel to the rest of it, because you kind of, about half the film is found footage style and the rest of it is traditional camera work and everything. But that one had more of an interesting idea because I felt the story was a little bit more unique compared to the others. And the found footage, again, it made it a little bit more memorable because the other ones were more of a traditional style of camera work. And I've got to say as well, on that one, there was a pretty decent and gnarly looking kind of like corpse, without spoiling anything. And I thought the acting with our 2 principal actors was fairly decent, to be honest. I kind of quite like that. So that to me was the the one strong film in this kind of bunch of 5, along with the actual kind of wraparound. The other 4 movies, our first one is kind of like a real cheap looking one, I have to say, where this woman is brings this guy back to ultimately kind of sacrifice him to the boogeyman. It looks really cheap. There's some weird lighting choices in this one. I guess it kind of makes it somewhat ethereal looking, but you can see right away. I mean, it won't take you 2 minutes to kind of like realise what the jig is with this movie. So I felt just the kind of the sets here looked really kind of cheap. I think the overuse of this kind of artificial light makes it look like it's set, and like it, you know, it's just, it has this cheap feel to it. The problem, I think, as well, and this is one of the things that runs through all of these films, is the boogeyman himself looks like Sloth from the Goonies wearing like a cheap monk costume. I have to say, considering we've used the same boogeyman for all of these stories, the boogeyman, I think, looks kind of weak, and I don't really know why he looks like that. Because it looks like another way you could look at him, he kind of looks like one of the orcs from the Lord of the Rings. It looks like he's got kind of like battle scars and things, and it's just like, it looks like he's had some type of injury and stuff. I don't understand why he's like this. It's just, that's not what I would imagine a boogeyman to look like. Not that I would know what a boogeyman looks like, but I would imagine him looking like more creepy, slender, kind of a bit more kind of eerie looking, rather than kind of like a battle-hardened orc in a monk's costume, or sloth. So I didn't really like that, and it also gives as I was kind of alluding to, because we have the same antagonist, although it does give the movie this kind of through line, it makes it for a very samey experience. I think only the 4th film, I think, manages to do something a little different. The rest of them, it's kind of very similar in a way. So the first one, you know, it's not terrible, but it's very kind of just like just a run-of-the-mill kind of short, if you want, but it looks real cheap. The second one is about this girl who's kind of taking these different drugs, these new kind of drugs, and she ends up sort of seeing the boogeyman. I quite like the idea here that she doesn't know if she is seeing an actual creature, or whether she knows that she's having these side effects from these drugs. So I thought that was a good idea. But again, it's very much just like this boogeyman kind of like in this cheap costume popping up and doing kind of scary stuff. I didn't really think there was much to it, to be honest. There's a funny little bit of dialogue with her and her ex, though. I would say that one. The third one is about this kind of guy who is hiding out with his brother after they've committed a crime. And again, it's just like the other two, it's just like a cheap looking movie in like filmed in like an apartment or a room with the boogeyman popping up here and there. This guy, he's committed a crime, and he keeps seeing flashes of the boogeyman, and it's kind of making him unhinged and everything. There's a couple of sequences where you see the boogeyman at far, where I think looks kind of effective, but again, this one seems to drag as well, I have to be honest. So they're all kind of, it's like somewhat flavourless is the best way I'll describe it. We've talked about the 4th one, which to me was by far the strongest and by far the most kind of unique kind of feeling. And then the 5th one is about this guy who is like, it's like a smackhead, like this kind of drug user who lives with his overbearing mother, and he keeps kind of seeing the boogeyman. But in this one, I suppose, at least the protagonist is proactive. He's trying to attack the boogeyman rather than kind of like run away all the time. So he's more of a fight on the kind of fight or flight kind of response, which again was a little bit of a difference here. But again, it's just the boogeyman appearing in rooms and scaring someone. It's kind of the same as like the first 3. So I didn't really feel this movie had a huge amount of variety. And in the 4th movie, I felt really gave us anything a little bit different, and even that ended up just being the boogeyman in a room, you know, scaring people. So it's kind of like the film has a great setup. I think the actual the concept of this framing device in this instance is stronger than the majority of the actual films, which is actually a rarity. Normally I find the kind of the framing device the weakest part, but here I actually think it's one of the strongest elements. And the actual films themselves, I mean, they're just like humdrum, and they've written themselves a problem where, because we have the same antagonist, it really falls the same thing, just kind of repeating and repeating. And the looks of the films are the same. They should have had a little bit more variety, not just like one person being scared in a room and there's boogeyman appearing and disappearing. It's very much just like so generic ultimately. So to me, this is somewhat of a forgettable anthology, and it looks cheap, and I think it could have benefited from a redesign of the boogeyman to make it more of an interesting, kind of unique looking character perhaps, and not just like sloth in a cloak with a sort of, you know, it didn't really look like a creepy guy. It looked like some kind of battle-hardened orc. I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Please do let me know what your thoughts are if you have, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.